Not yet.
Good afternoon all. I'm Nicola Contouris, I'm the Director of Research at the ETUI, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this hybrid workshop that we have co-organized between the ETUC and the ETUI. The ETUC is well represented in this room by Lina Carr, who's the Confederal Secretary of the ETUC, that will be addressing you very soon in order to offer the policy context for this event. There's also Marina Monaco, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all here. The event focuses on a very important topic, the topic of minimum income across all ages, and it's clear that there's it's clear that there is a real problem with poverty and exclusion across a number of demographic groups in our society. But it's also clear that there's some groups that are disproportionately affected, especially the elderly. You will soon hear from two outstanding experts in the domain of welfare state regulation and social policy, Professor Natalie from the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna, and Dr. Terlizzi, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Law, Politics and Development in the same school. Their research that they have produced for us is soon to be circulated in the form of a working paper. And for this event today, they have kindly shared with us an executive summary of their work. The research offers a very clear, I would say even compelling evidence about the risk of poverty across the EU. In the EU, across, as I was saying, a range of different democratic groups, but it's also clear that there is a strong correlation, evidenced by the work, in terms of the performance or underperformance of some welfare models, which is aggravated by long-standing pressures on the fabric and regulation of all welfare systems and even labor market and social institutions across a wide range of member states, both old and new. It's equally clear that addressing all these shortcomings will require a sustained, wide-ranging policy efforts. And on this particular point, Lina Carr will very soon give you some further updates, because there are some interesting updates in Brussels almost on a daily basis. The way the event is structured is that there will be two sets of presentations by our experts, followed by two sets of discussions with some extremely well-qualified discussants present in the room physically and virtually, including the people that you see next to me, Marco Cilento and Marina Monaco. Marina will be chairing the first part of the discussion. We will have the pleasure of listening from Tim Godeme, a Senior Research Fellow in Social Policy at the University of Antwerp. Hello, Tim. Ruto Guerra, who is the Deputy Director General of the Cabinet for Strategy and Planning. I was trying to say it in the regional language, but I think I'll stick to English. And Romain Lasserre, the Legal Counselor from CGT FO. And this will be followed by question and answers from the approximately 100 people that are following this webinar online. We'll be monitoring very carefully the Q&A, so please feel free to ask questions. The second part of the discussion, we follow a short presentation by our two experts on the right to minimum income across all ages and the economic policy debate. This will be chaired by Marco Cilento, who's right next to me. And the discussants will be Matteo Jessola and Marcello Natili from the University of Milan, Girish Varg, the Head of Unit on Social Policies and Child Guarantee from the European Commission, and Judith Lerne Ivani, apologies for my pronunciation, the Legal Vice President from Hungarian MOS. We will then wrap up some conclusions and bring this event to a close. And Lina, if you would like to say something before
yes.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicola, for this introduction and explanations how we are going to run our webinar. This is anybody who has been following the minimum income debate knows that there has been a discussion on the legal base and how it can be done, what it means in terms of voting in the council, the qualified majority voting versus unanimity voting. We were told many times that this depends precisely on who the minimum income should apply to, whether it's only people in the sort of labor force age or whether it should apply to all. And that is supposed to make a difference on the treaty article used and then the voting procedure used. For the ETUC, this is the joint study that was conducted by the ETUI. Thank you very much for the ETUI commissioning the study and working with the experts on this very topical and very important issue. And from the ETUC point of view, this is a continuation and is a complementary to the work that we have done in our Socio-All project that was running for 2 years previously. From a trade union point of view, very clearly the right to minimum income is, especially with a view to the recommendation on minimum income to come this year. We want to make sure that the minimum income is going to be adequate and it really covers everybody, so across all ages, like the European Pillar of Social Rights principles says. And also it needs to be effective protecting against poverty, and it has to be also enabling in the sense of working for working age people, helping them to get back to the labor market if they are outside the labor market. And for older people who have reached the retirement age already, to assist them to lead their later life in dignity. Of course, we are looking at the sort of who should be targeted. Very clearly, the most vulnerable groups need to be targeted. So especially people excluded from other sources of income. We need to also look at the gender dimension there, because we know that when we are looking at pensions, there is quite a big gender pension gap, which obviously kind of is carried over from the pay gap, gender pay gap during the working life. But also we would like to understand that the vulnerable group of people that we have, that inside this group there are also kind of a scale, that there are some people who are really vulnerable, and the others who are maybe it's easier to get them back to the labor market, or to help them to improve their quality of life. So Nicola already explained what the two topics are under the discussion, and so I looking forward to, with great interest, hearing our experts, but also comments, questions from the participants who are listening, watching us online. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think we have David and Andrea here. The floor is yours, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Lina, for your first input. Andrea is sharing the slides, so he will be the, let's say, the projector of the different slide figures and graphs that we have prepared. I will try to be consistent with the time schedule, and so rapid and brief in my presentation. We have a lot of data and information to share with you. I would like to start with two preliminary, let's say, indication to the audience. The first one is that basically this project has been a sort of instant project, in the sense that the mandate that we received was to advance and progress in our research in a couple of months. And so consequently, the idea was, rather than producing some innovative piece of research, more to be systematic in the collection of information and data coming from the literature, and provide so a systematic review of what we know about the state of elderly people, comparing them with the other age groups across Europe, and what are, let's say, the prospects for protecting against poverty and social exclusion. Second of all, the presentation will be necessarily brief. So we will, remind you that basically in some weeks there will be the proper working paper that will be very much in line with the final report of our project, where more details will be provided about data related to poverty risks across Europe, about the organization of the different minimum income schemes and guarantees across the EU, and at the same time also providing information about the state of the debate at the European level. Final points, let's say, as already stressed by Nicola, but also by Lina, this project was also a sort of a bridge between the main findings coming from social protection for all. I think all of you knows about this major project that has been coordinated by the European Trade Union Confederation, precisely on shedding lights on social protection rights across Europe. And this was, I would say, a very successful project that provided a lot of information and interesting insights about the prospects for the further progress of social rights across Europe. And then in few weeks, I imagine, there will be also the first, let's say, steps in the implementation of the brand new Social Protection for All project that will be again coordinated by the ETUC and financed by the DG Employment. So the project is to some extent a little bridge between the two, so using a lot of information coming from the first project and then providing some room for reflection useful for the next steps in the new social protection for all project. That said, I immediately started showing and sharing with you the first preliminary remarks coming from our project. I ask Andrea to go to the second slide. Here it is. This is the outline of the project, and it is also the outline of our presentation today. Basically, the project has been designed in terms of 3 different steps. The first one was precisely to shed light on poverty risks across Europe, in particular trying to understand a little bit what has been the impact of the pandemic and what is nowadays the state of, let's say, the geography also of poverty risks across Europe and across age groups. Second of all, mapping minimum income schemes and minimum income guarantees across European member states, providing some information. I would say by definition, no systematic information of the efficacy of these schemes before and after the pandemic. And the third part is more about the sort of review of the state of the debate at European Union level. We know that, the last few years has been a huge dialogue and debate from an institutional point of view, but also in terms of stakeholders and social partners, precisely on the opportunity to launch a new directive for minimum income, or this is the, let's say, the new prospect, a less ambitious recommendation on the same topic. We will talk a little bit about what are the positions at stake, what are in particular the key issues that are debated and will be addressed by the new instruments the Commission is working on. First of all, so poverty risks across Europe. Let's start with the impact of the pandemic. This is the first broad picture that comes from the EUC data, and it is about the last decade of at risk of poverty or social exclusion indicator across the European Union countries. And the picture that we show is something that we named or titled a sort of Sisyphus trend, meaning basically that the last decades have seen some incremental improvement in the evolution of the ratio of people at risk of poverty and social exclusion. That has been the consequence of many different things, to some extent, some positive economic trends, some innovations from an institutional policy perspective, with some reforms that have been set up and implemented in many European countries, all these contributing, let's say, to some incremental improvement. At the same time, this long-term trend has been punctuated by major crises, major economic recessions, basically on the one hand, the Great Recession of 2008 and the following years, and the more recent pandemic and the so-called Great Lockdown. So this is basically what the picture tells us. You see the figure on the right side of the screen. Well, you see that if we take 2010 as the starting point of our analysis, what we see is basically a level of the number of people at risk of poverty or social exclusion in the European Union at 27, about 103 million people in 2010. Then there was an increase and this was the consequence in many respects of the Great Recession. There's then an incremental decrease of the same risks up to 2019, when again, between 2019 and 2020, there has been the first impact of the pandemic, with a rapid increase again of the number of persons at risk of poverty or social exclusion, with the final figure represented by about a little bit more than 96 million persons at risk in Europe, with, as you see, a quite huge increase of risks of poverty and social exclusion precisely in the last months and in the first, let's say, months of the pandemic. This means, in other words, this ongoing up and down with a sort of Sisyphus. You know, it's like European policymakers, both at the European and national level, try their best to improve the situation, but then when a major economic recession comes out, then there is a rapid decrease, let's say, or the efficacy of these strategies and a worsening of the situation. So an increased risk determined by the pandemic and the major economic recessions we have seen in the last decade. The second slide tries to go a little bit more into detail, and using still the AROPE indicator, basically disentangle the situation of different gender and age groups. These are the two dimensions that we are trying to focus more throughout the project. First of all, in terms of gender balance or imbalance, let's say there is a confirmation. Before and after the pandemic, the female part of the population is more at risk of poverty across all ages. So this means that there is a confirmation that there is a gender issue on the topic, and this is also the case for the elderly part of the population. The female part is more at risk than the male part. The second issue is more related to the age groups, and this is the second red circles you see at the core of the slide. Basically, what we see is quite a diversity of the incidence of poverty or social exclusion risks for different age groups. As you see, the first image seems to confirm that, you know, there is a higher risk for the younger part of the population up to 25. Then there is the lowest risk for the working age population, and then a further increase for the elderly part of the population. And this seemed to confirm at the first glance that basically younger cohorts of European citizens are more at risk of poverty or social exclusion. But throughout our project, we have tried to qualify a little what is a sort of stereotypical message that from time to time come from comparative analysis across Europe. And so if Andrea goes to the following slide, thank you, Andrea. What we see here is the more recent data from UCIL about this time AROP indicator, so at risk of poverty for different age groups. And here you see the more recent trends between 2019 and 2020. So again, the first impact of the pandemic differentiated across age groups. And here you see a more complex, let's say, picture. On the one hand, there is a confirmation that people below 25 are those most at risk of poverty. At the same time, both in absolute terms and in terms of recent trends, the situation of the elderly, and in particular of the population over 75, is, I would say, quite difficult and worsening. You see, for the age group over 75, the risk of poverty is extremely high, is the second highest when we compare the different age groups, and has worsening the most after the pandemic. So in the last year, between 2019 and 2020, what we see is a rapid deterioration of the situation of the over 75. And if you compare 2019 and 2020, you see that this is the most evident worsening of the condition of different age groups. So in terms of trends, if you look at the final line in the bottom of the slide, what we see is a sort of divergent trends after the pandemic. On the one hand, the younger part of the population, including the working age population, is going not that bad in terms of the incidence of poverty risks. By contrast, the older part of the population worsen its own condition. And this is a major alarm bell, I would say, for stakeholders, for the trade union movement, also for the analysts, in the sense that if the previous slide seemed to confirm major incidence of poverty and social exclusion risk for younger generation, this has to be qualified. And in fact, especially the condition of the over 75 is particularly dramatic, I would say. Andrea, if you can move to the other, okay. And this is also confirmed by another dimension of poverty risks across Europe that is basically related not just to monetary poverty, is not just related to the social exclusion as defined by the social scoreboard, but is also related to other indicators that seem to confirm this evidence. Here we refer to indicators provided by Eurofound, and these are indicators related to self-perception of the different age groups of their own conditions in terms of social exclusion, in terms of poverty risks, and so on. Here you see two different data. One is related to the so-called difficulty making ends meet. This is a quite ambiguous, to some extent, and vague indicator provided by Eurofound that at the same time is quite interesting in the evidence that it provides. Again, between, let's say, the pre and the post-pandemic situation across Europe. Here you see, again, a differentiation between age groups. And again, as you see, the age group over 65 is the one that has perceived a more evident deterioration of their own financial conditions in dealing with, let's say, financial obligations like paying bills, heating bills, the rent, and things like that. As you see, there is some stability for younger age groups before and after the pandemic. By contrast, there is a perceived deterioration of the condition of the over 65. And so this is consistent with the previous slides and the previous evidence. And this is also the case if we move from monetary poverty or financial deprivation to problems in access to social and in particular healthcare services. The slide, let's say the graph in the bottom side of the slide refer to problems in accessing healthcare across Europe, the so-called unmet medical needs. Again, the source is Eurofound, and here you see basically a deterioration all over Europe, and in particular, as you see, a postponement of care from health institutions. And this is again for people aged over 50. So all this seems to confirm that there is a risk of the deterioration of the condition of the elderly, both in terms of monetary conditions, but also in terms of access to healthcare and social care in a broader sense. So problems in terms of monetary transfer or monetary conditions on one hand, but also in access to services on the other, especially after the pandemic. Okay. Yeah, Andrea, can you move on? Let's see. Okay. This just to provide the final information about the different conditions of people at risk of poverty or social exclusion across Europe. And this is related to two further dimensions of this diversity. On the one hand, the geographical one. The figure on people at risk of poverty in old age compared to people at risk of poverty in the working age part of the population basically confirms that there is a sort of cleavage from a territorial point of view. There are some countries where elderly people are more at risk of poverty than younger cohorts. And this is the case, for instance, of the Baltic countries, where poverty is a major risk, dramatic, I would say. It is also the case of Southeastern European countries, Bulgaria, Romania. while there is another group of countries, for instance, the Scandinavian ones, some of continental European countries, Southern European countries, where the older part of the population is less at risk of poverty than the working age part of the population. There are many reasons for these different prospects, but in any case, this is a major cleavage to some extent from a territorial point of view. Another dimension, again, confirmed by our analysis, and this is just related to information and data up to 2019. So the impact of the pandemic is not considered here. Again, there is a confirmation of the gender imbalance and the gender divide. Again, the female part of the population, even the female elderly part of the population, are clearly more at risk of poverty and material deprivation compared to the male part of the population. So this means that from our evidence, it is quite clear what are, let's say, the risk, the more vulnerable groups across Europe, both in terms of what are the countries where these groups are concentrated, what are the gender dimensions that are more relevant, and also the age groups that are more at risk. So to wrap up, let's say a very diversified kind of picture on all different the different dimensions. Going to the second section, let's say, of the final report of the project. So the minimum income schemes and guarantees across Europe and their efficacy. Here, basically, we have time just to provide a very sketchy summary of what we have done in our project. First of all, we have tried to systematize the different typologies and taxonomies that are provided by the literature. And here, again, we have taken inspiration, first of all, from the social project. For instance, Benjamin Benz provided a very illuminating kind of comparative analysis of minimum income protection, also across age groups, dividing, let's say, the different types of minimum income protection across European member states. And the first major elements of division is between the contributory schemes and the non-contributory ones, especially as far as the elderly. And so contributory pensions and non-contributory minimum income guarantees. And here, what has been outlined by the literature is that in the last decades, there has been a sort of trends towards some form of social assistance benefits, non-contributory benefits, even in Bismarckian countries, even in Southern European countries, that were to some extent the latecomers in that context. You know absolutely clear the case of Greece, the case of Italy, where minimum income guarantees for the elderly have been introduced in more recent years. This is the taxonomy provided by Benz that is largely confirmed also by the work by Tim. Tim could also talk about his own work of definition of taxonomies and typologies of minimum income guarantees. Here we refer to the work by Tim and Sarah Marshall of 2016. Again, as far as the non-contributory schemes, there is a clear distinction between the basic ones, inspired by a more universalistic kind of approach. And nowadays, let's say the Netherlands are the only almost pure basic pension that are in Europe. All the others, little by little, introduce some kind of income test or means test. And then there is the conditional basic pensions, and more in Scandinavia, this is the case. And then the so-called social pensions that are based on very detailed forms of means testing, a little bit all over Europe. So this just to provide a sort of map of what are the institutions that have been set up in the different European countries. Then going to the efficacy of these schemes, I here leave the floor to Andrea, that basically spends quite a lot of time in trying to systematize the different data, even if problems of comparability, as we will say in a few seconds, are extremely relevant and basically reduce the comparability of the data provided in the literature. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, very briefly, as we can see from these graphs, these are the amount here in euro of the level of minimum income and minimum pension across European countries. So apparently we have minimum pensions which outperform minimum income for working age population. However, there are many problems of comparability with mixed-up data, and this is not, let's say, it's not a new problem. We do know that there have been several calls for improvements of to the mixed-up database. For example, the European Social Observatory is advocating for that, at least since the last decade. So recently, also a policy brief from the European Parliament on minimum income protection in the EU highlights that the data availability at the European level through mixed-up data, but also ETUC is problematic. So the policy brief concludes that there is a need to harmonize administrative data at the national level. So the very methods through which data are collected at the national level. So mixed-up data are difficult to compare because of course of the many distinctions that must be made regarding the conditionalities in terms of, for example, income brackets, age groups, or compensation supplements. So it is very difficult, if not impossible, to provide a single number which captures all the distinction that must be made. And we also have to say that, of course, these difficulties stem from the very different nature and institutional arrangements of minimum income schemes across the EU. So in this graph, for some countries, for example, it has been reported the average between the maximum and minimum possible amount. For other countries, it has been reported the highest level among those offered by different regional schemes. For example, it is the case for Austria. Also, in some cases, the weekly amount has been converted into the corresponding monthly value. And for example, for Italy, we did not rely upon mixed-up data, which were very difficult to interpret, but we reported data from the National Institute for Social Security on the average amount provided at the national level. And in February 2022, this has been approximately 600 euro for minimum income and 300 euro for minimum pension. So this is to say that this picture wants to be just a, let's say, an overall, wants to give an overall picture, picture of the situation, but we still need to make many improvements in data collection and analysis for comparative purposes.
Okay.
So now I will leave the floor again to
David.
yeah.
Okay, we now go to the end of this first part of the presentation. If Andrea can move. I just want to refer to this study by Marshall and Sioland that is, at least for me and Andrea, still one of the best that is from a comparative perspective. And here, what you see, I would outline the right part of the screen where you see the situation of the income components of old age household without access to contributory pensions as a percentage of the medium income poverty threshold across Europe. And this shows that basically in most part of the EU member states, minimum pensions are below, minimum non-contributory pensions are below the poverty line. And this is, as you see, comparable to what's going on for the working age population and for medium and minimum income schemes for them. So this means that basically still today, major part of countries show that minimum protection against poverty is not effective, as not adequate. And so it's not by chance that adequacy is still a key issue in the European debate nowadays, and also for the preparation of a new recommendation in the next months. Few countries, you see the Netherlands, Denmark, to some extent UK and Austria, are able to be on the verge, on the edge of the minimum income threshold. The others are clearly below. And that's a major problem in terms of adequacy. Andrea, if you move again, we go to wrap up different evidence. Here we just refer to what you will see in more detail in the report, in the final report. It is a recent study on Denmark, Italy, Slovenia, and the United Kingdom that me and Andrea provided for another project. And basically, we also use data coming from official documents, comparative studies like the one published recently by Bernard Ebbinghaus on social policy and administration that basically confirmed that countries with basic pensions perform quite well in protecting against old age risks. A little bit more uneven is the protection provided by this market system. But the latter seems to be the result not just of the design of minimum income schemes, but also of the complex interplay between minimum income protection, social protection in a broader sense, and healthcare and social services access. So the bunch of these elements then contribute to the efficacy of the strategies to fight against poverty and social exclusion. So to wrap up, and that's really the final slide of the first part of our presentation, a brief recap. First of all, after the pandemic, poverty risks are on the rise in Europe. Second of all, at the first glance, in the aftermath of the pandemic, older people suffer severe financial problems and difficult access to health services. And this seems to at least partly contradict the ongoing rhetoric of the older part of the population being less at risk of poverty and social exclusion than the younger part of the population. This is particularly the case for the age group over 75, that as you see, as you have seen in the previous slides, has particular problems in dealing with limited access to social and healthcare services and dealing with, let's say, financial issues and obligations. Fourth point, the capacity to protect the elderly is still quite limited and fragile. In major part of your countries, minimum income guarantees for the elderly are below the poverty line. Finally, in that respect, a more effective minimum income guarantee is crucial to protect against the poverty and social exclusion. Last but not least, this is very much related to the definition and the design of a policy mix where monetary transfers and more easy access to services has to be granted by and in the different member states. I stop here. I thank you so much, and I apologize for having been a little bit longer than expected. So the floor is for the discussants and then for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And we now have approximately half an hour, 40 minutes for our discussion that will be chaired by Marina Monaco, Policy Advisor at ETUC, who's here in the room.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much to the speakers who have planned and managed to be with us today. I would like not to take too much time with any introduction, but I would like to frame the questions to our two major experts in the field. One is a researcher, Tim Godeman, and the other one is Ruth Guerra, representative of an important institution, the Social Protection Committee of the Council, responsible for monitoring the social protection effectiveness and the situation across member states. And my first question is the following. It is not the first time that the EU, and certainly the ETUC, addresses the issues of poverty. And we have seen the knowledge-based wrap-up of the issues, the main features of this poverty plague across Europe. It is not the first time that member states are encouraged and requested to undertake measures in order to tackle the issues of people who don't have an income security. Nevertheless, we understand that across a decade at least, the effectiveness of these measures hasn't been substantial. In addition, we see there is a discrepancy between the politics applying to minimum income for elderly people, because the logic is the logic of pension policy, which has a peculiar governance at economic level as well, and the issues affecting people in working age, which are connected certainly to labor market, long-term unemployment issues, and so on. From your point of view, what are the most needed interventions that the EU and probably the academy, the research world is able to contribute with to a solution of the problem at national level on the ground in a tailored dimension as the national one is as a national one, and how can this become, let's say, a building block for upward convergence at European level? Tim, I am forced to constrain your intervention to max 7 minutes.
Thank you. I'm slightly confused. Am I also supposed to present something, or do you want me to just respond to this question?
I think it would be very useful to have your comments on the evidence that David presented.
Okay.
And,
okay. Then I'll come back to your question as well. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you, and thank you for having me. So I was asked initially also to present some work to which the work that has been presented also refers to. And so I think at the same time, this will lead to some comments and suggestions as well. And I basically have two main points, and then I'll come back to the point of comparability in the question that has just been asked. So I will say a couple of words on a new poverty measure that I have developed with some colleagues, and which I think outperforms some of the indicators that are very often used to monitor poverty and the adequacy of minimum income schemes. And then I want to re-emphasize the importance and added value of reference budgets to not only point to the income side, but also to the expenditures and the cost of essential goods and services that households have to meet. And so the first point is about an alternative poverty indicator. And currently poverty is monitored by a dashboard of indicators, but for many studies, only 1 or 2 indicators are singled out. And when this relates in particular to the so-called at-risk of poverty indicator. However, there are recurring debates on this indicator, in particular when we have fast economic growth or decline, or when we compare across countries. And this has direct relevance also for how we assess the adequacy of minimum income schemes. And so we believe that we provide now an indicator which does a better job in summarizing both trends in poverty and the ranking across countries. And so that's what I want to talk about a bit. And just to show you how this works, or explain you very, very concisely, in contrast to most indicators of poverty, we work with 2 thresholds rather than 1. So our indicator is very similar to the at-risk of poverty indicator, but we just add something else by also evaluating poverty with reference to 1 fixed threshold, which is the same for all countries and which remains constant in terms of purchasing power across time. It's a relatively low threshold, in most countries lower than the at-risk of poverty threshold. And basically what we do is that we give a kind of weight to the depth of poverty. And so when people have an income below this low fixed threshold, we count them as 1. And when they have an income below this, between this fixed threshold and the at risk of poverty threshold, then we give them a weight which is proportionate to the distance between their income and this relative threshold. I know that now this seems a bit complex, but the results are quite informative and I think also quite intuitive. And so in this graph, basically what you see with this line here at the top, that's the classic at risk of poverty rate. And then the line in the middle here, that's our own indicator, our new indicator, which we call the extended headcount ratio. And just to pick out two countries to see how our indicator operates, is that it's very instructive to compare, for instance, Poland and Germany. And if we look at the at-risk of poverty rate, we can see that in Germany, this is even slightly higher than in Poland, which goes, of course, contrary to many people's intuitions and the experiences that we see also in terms of other indicators. And in contrast, our indicator shows that in Poland, poverty is considerably higher than in Germany. And the reason is that many people in Poland have an income below this lower threshold, which we keep constant across countries. And that's what you see in the lowest line here. So it's way higher in Poland than it is in Germany. And so that's why our indicator yields, I think, a more consistent ranking of countries in terms of their level of poverty. And
but let's say, just to approach a conclusion and a reply, that an indicator picturing better the situation and possibly the needs of people is badly needed, and there are rooms for concrete proposals.
Yes. Yeah, so this is one proposal that we would say would help to monitor poverty in a more consistent way. Yeah, if you have to choose one indicator. And so, and we can also look at trends over time. So this is what our indicator shows for Greece. And this is the period, obviously, of the last financial crisis, where we see with our indicator, very strong increase in poverty. And this is in stark contrast with the at-risk of poverty indicator. Of course, there are other indicators within the social dashboard or scoreboard, which would also show an increase in poverty. But the problem is that they are not consistent than in other ways. And so our indicator does a good job, both in terms of cross-country comparisons and monitoring trends over time. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. And the second thing is about monitoring the adequacy of minimum income protection. And I think it's always important to stress that just providing people with sufficient income is really important, because income provides autonomy. There's a big difference in terms of buying your food yourself or just getting your food for free from a food bank, as we all understand. At the same time, a lot of indicators just focus on the level of income that people receive. But we should always put this into context with the costs that people face, with the level of the price level of goods and services. And so we should monitor also the affordability in terms of the cost of living. And obviously nowadays with these high inflation rates, this is more relevant than ever. And so that's why I think, and this also is mentioned in a commentary by Anna Valanker and others who did a study on a framework directive on minimum income protection several years ago, in which they also referred to the importance of reference budgets. And so in this graph, I show the outcome of a project that we did a couple of years ago, where we tried to develop comparable reference budgets for a number of countries. And basically with this exercise, you ask the question, okay, what is the minimum cost for accessing essential goods and services? So you make a list of essential goods and services, and then you do a price survey to attach a price to it. And if you would compare this, as we do in this graph, to the level of the at-risk of poverty threshold, which is the dark line that you see, then you can see that in quite a few countries, the minimum cost of essential goods and services is significantly above the at-risk of poverty threshold. Not everywhere though. What these reference budgets also show is that it is so important to take account of people's tenant status when you evaluate the adequacy of minimum income protection. Because obviously people who still have to pay rent are in a very different position compared to those who are outright owners. And that's also what you see in this graph. So just to wrap up, I think it's important that there are alternative poverty measures that would be probably better lead indicators. Looking at minimum income protection is really important. At the same time, we have to be careful that it's not just about income, it's also about the cost of essential goods and services. And so David referred to accessibility of services, but I think we should also talk about goods and especially housing. And I think reference budgets could provide more insight into this. At the same time, when we talk about indicators, I think it's important to reflect on the political strategy. I don't want to criticize the at-risk of poverty threshold or indicator just for that, because I think it's a very important measure which has helped really to keep poverty on the political agenda at the EU level as well. And now, if you would allow me to just say one word about comparability of data on minimum income protection. I think, of course, MISOC, for instance, can be improved. At the same time, I think when we want to look into the adequacy of minimum income protection, we really have to look at the entire package, because minimum income protection is always in interaction with other systems like housing benefits or taxation and so on. And so that's why we need hypothetical household simulations, such as with the HOT tool in Euromod, which is quite technical, but I think people from the European Commission know this very well. And so I think that's one way of achieving comparability with these indicators. And I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I'm very sorry, but time is really running, and I would like to hear the views of Mrs. Guerra and of the work that the Social Protection Committee is engaged on, but also a couple of reactions from the trade union world. So, Ruth, the floor is yours. If you can stay short, we will have opportunities maybe to react also to questions of the colleagues from the floor.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me well? So, good afternoon to all. First of all, I would like to thank you, ETUC and ETUI, for the invitation to this interesting workshop and to have the opportunity to discuss on these issues with you. I have a PowerPoint, but I understand that there's no need to present, but it was just to support the intervention and not to boring you so much. So I just, as you may know, and as you already said, the committee, I'm here as representative of the Social Protection Committee, as a vice chair, not as deputy director of the Cabinet for Strategy and Planning, but thank you. And anyway, it's the, as you know, this committee is an advisory body of the European Council of Ministers of Social Affairs that consists of delegates from all member states and the European Commission. I also would like to congratulate you and to David for the study that has just been presented. I must say that some of the main conclusions are in line with what we have been working in the field of analysis at the Social Protection Committee. So saying that, I would like just to point out some of our relevant activities under the open method of coordination, since we monitor the social situation across the EU for all ages and groups. And I would like to point out this because these are important and they are tools that we provide to the member states to discuss these issues. So first of all, these are just examples, but our member states can engage in dedicated thematic exchanges, such as, for example, one that we have just had concerning the non-take-up benefits. We also organizing peer reviews used by member states to showcase a particularly good practice or gather expert advice from the other countries to inform the process of preparation of a major policy reform. And I must say that in 2008, 2018, we have organized a minimum income peer review that was hosted by Germany. Also in the framework of the European semester, with each year we review the implementation of country-specific recommendation in the area of our competences. And also through our indicators group, we developed the various monitoring tools and benchmarking frameworks. And so the issues that you raised up also, Tim, are crucial to this. We also have a dedicated minimum income network, which enables target in-depth discussion between minimum income experts. Also the annual report that monitors the progress towards the targets in poverty. And we intend this year to publish a flagship report on minimum income report. Those activities and those discussions that we have, we verify that the means tested minimum income schemes exists in all EU member states, also to provide income replacement for those without sufficient means of existence. They may supplement low wages and pensions. These schemes, of course, vary significantly in terms of adequacy, coverage, take-up, and articulation with labor market activation measures, and also provide provision of enabling goods and or services. When we are discussing minimum income guarantees, and the evidence says that to us, we should look also at the existing schemes available for working age population, together with ones available for retired people. Moreover, the various benefits available for families, in particular those concerning child poverty, also have an impact on the income of the various households in the society. I'm saying that because national systems are rather complex and the benefit schemes are interconnected. And so for the assessment of the individual performance of the member states, we are always contextualizing in this way. But since there are common challenges and some similarities among the various income support schemes, we have been developing particular joint methods to monitor policy developments in a comparable manner. That's why we're developing benchmarking frameworks for minimum income. And I must say, of course, there are a lot of indicators, but we have to we have to have comparable indicators, and all the member states have to have the same source. Of course, we can also monitoring this, taking account the administrative data, but in that case, it's more difficult to have comparisons. So through this benchmarking framework, we identify indicators to assess the adequacy of minimum incomes, and to comparing the income of minimum income beneficiaries to the poverty threshold on one hand and to the income of the low wage earner on the other hand. And these are indicators that has been used for the joint employment report, for instance. Now we are it's under preparation a joint social protection committee and commission report following the council conclusions adopted under the German presidency. And this report, it's about the minimum income, will be delivered probably in June 2022 or later. And it intends to provide an overview of the existing national schemes and explore common features and potential areas to improve, like the adequacy, coverage, take-up, and issues like that. I'm going to accelerate, but I also would like to call. We have some discussions also concerning the non-take-up, because there are higher non-take-up from those when we are looking to those who can benefit from the minimum income schemes and who are not benefiting from that. And we have a thematic discussion in March just to approach what are the challenges on that. And this will also feed in on the report that I have just mentioned. I also would like to call your attention to the pensions adequacy report that is released every 3 years, and this relates with the issues of old age poverty and the income for supporting retired people. So through the social open method of coordination, the Social Protection Committee is the main point reference for analyzing the pensions adequacy in Europe and at national level. And this is complementary with the aging report that is produced by ECOFIN and the Employment and the Economic Committee that deals with sustainability. This last report that was released last year provides an overview of current adequacy indicators and also the projections around this. We also look into the pension systems and the recent reforms, and also an in-depth analysis of the way risks and resources are shared and the financing of pensions. And looking to the current standards of old age people, one of the main findings of the report is that the minimum old age benefits can be an important adequacy safeguard for those with short careers or low incomes. Also, we find that member states have put in place diverse minimum income schemes, which are often non-contributory and needs-based. And the share of older people who rely on minimum benefits are often women, this has remained generally stable over the past 3 years. While at the same time, new measures were adopted in a number of countries to expand the minimum income protection in old age. So we can come back after to this question, but I would just like to underline that the means-tested minimum income schemes play an important role in fighting poverty. Is that what we find out, and in the promoting of social inclusion by providing income replacement for those without sufficient means of existence. SPC, of course, intends to continue engaging in this important topic within the scope of the activities that I have just mentioned above. But trying to reply to your first question, Marina, I cannot see a different way out. Of course, the progress is different from the different member states. And if you look into that reports I've mentioned, we have country profiles for each report. And of course, there are countries that have improved and now that are more, that combat poverty in a more efficient way, but there are huge difference across all of Europe. But I think the solution is continue to change best practice, to improve the knowledge, to improve the indicators, working with academia, working with the social partners, with civil society, to have a better knowledge base so that we can have better policies to approach these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth, and it was quite an interesting complementary input to teams. I would just like to ask our colleagues from the trade unions now to help me not compress too much the next session, but to provide us with 3 bullet points, possibly 3 minutes, in order to give us the flavor of the national level of the issues that poverty and not efficient schemes can provide. Roman, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Marina. Should I start?
Please.
Thank you. I will switch in French as there is translation, and maybe I may be quicker also to sort out so the speaking time. Donc, très rapidement, en tout cas, merci à la CES et l'ETUI de me laisser intervenir aujourd'hui pour peut-être donner davantage de perspectives syndicales justement à cet événement et justement essayer de peut-être jeter plus de lumière sur ce qui a été précédemment dit, en tout cas aussi qui a été très intéressant, les différentes présentations et différents points précédents. Pour faire 3 points assez rapidement, je reviendrai peut-être directement sur la question qui a été déjà soulevée, peut-être des limites qui peuvent être celles des indicateurs actuels et notamment de la fameuse seuil de pauvreté défini à 60% du revenu médian, justement en faisant peut-être davantage référence avec les budgets de référence qui a été évoqué et peut-être le lier justement à la question du dialogue social en France. En France, on a la Commission nationale de lutte contre la pauvreté et l'exclusion sociale et l'Observatoire de lutte contre la pauvreté qui ont publié justement en 2015, y compris avec la contribution des interlocuteurs sociaux français, justement un rapport assez complet sur les budgets de référence et qui montrait justement et qui pouvait peut-être décortiquer justement les problématiques qui pouvaient s'imposer en termes d'adéquation du revenu minimum, et y compris des minima vieillesse. Ce qui était intéressant, c'est qu'on avait notamment une décomposition par rapport à la composition du ménage, y compris par rapport aux différents groupes d'âge, et qui justement montrait clairement en effet qu'il y avait des problématiques additionnelles qui pouvaient se présenter, et que en tout cas, y compris le seuil de 60% était peut-être un peu trop arbitraire pour justement définir complètement la possibilité pour chacun de vivre selon des conditions de vie décentes. Et je serai très bref, en tout cas ce qui a été notamment souligné, c'était aussi, notamment pour le cas de la France, la question du poids du coût du logement, qui justement peut être parfois différent d'un prisme à l'autre des écarts d'âge, et qui montre justement peut-être la pertinence de peut-être remettre parfois plus en question le sacro-saint seuil de pauvreté tel qu'il peut être défini. Ensuite, je reviendrai sur la question très rapidement, peut-être de ce qui peut se faire au niveau européen. On a eu une très intéressante intervention du SPC précédemment. Peut-être revenir sur la question en effet de l'échec de la stratégie Europe 2020 et justement de l'opportunité qui se présente avec les cibles 2030 de Porto et justement la nouvelle cible pour réduire la pauvreté et l'exclusion sociale, pour aller encore plus loin et amorcer une dynamique qui permette justement effectivement d'aller plus loin et de réduire effectivement les difficultés rencontrées partout en Europe. Et malheureusement, le chiffre a été atteint d'Europe 2020 dans très peu d'États membres, et la France n'en faisait pas partie. Sur ce point de vue-là, encore une fois, peut-être rappeler toute l'opportunité du dialogue social, y compris dans l'adaptation des cibles 2030 de Porto au niveau national. Dans le cas de la France, on a eu quelques échanges. Malheureusement, on avait eu une certaine fermeté justement à la définition, y compris de sous-cibles qui permettent peut-être de mettre davantage en perspective, justement par rapport aux spécificités nationales, l'opportunité de lutter plus efficacement contre la pauvreté et l'exclusion sociale. On a vu justement que la France fait souvent office de bon élève, peut-être grâce au système actuel tel qu'il est, et justement appuyé notamment par un système de sécurité sociale et d'assistance sociale, d'inspiration bismarckienne. Mais en tout cas, il y avait malheureusement un refus de s'attaquer à des problématiques plus concrètes, comme par exemple le taux élevé de privation matérielle auxquels peuvent être confrontés notamment les Français, qui peut-être moins, en tout cas parmi les bons élèves en Europe. Malheureusement, on a eu une certaine fermeture, mais ce sera en tout cas un instrument à suivre avec la plus grande attention pour mieux lutter efficacement au niveau national contre la pauvreté. Et enfin, un dernier point très rapidement pour conclure, je reviendrai peut-être sur des cas très précis, en tout cas aussi des limites qui peuvent se poser concrètement à l'accès au droit à un revenu minimum. Je parlerai très succinctement de la question des personnes handicapées. En France, on a un souci autour de la question de conjugalisation du revenu minimum pour les personnes handicapées, qui est vécu comme une entrave à l'accès au droit à un revenu minimum. Et pour être très bref, c'est la subordination de l'accès à ce revenu justement au revenu du conjoint dans les différentes conditions, que ce soit indépendamment du mariage, du régime de concubin, donc véritablement une sorte de communauté de biens, mais y compris pour les personnes qui vivent sous le même toit. Donc certaines personnes, malheureusement, ont tendance à même ne pas relationner pour justement maintenir leur droit à un revenu minimum. C'est une problématique très centrale. Ensuite, on a aussi la question de la problématique du revenu minimum pour les jeunes. On voit qu'il existe en France un revenu minimum d'activité pour les 18-25 ans, mais les conditions sont extrêmement restrictives, voire impossibles à atteindre et qui justement grèvent les perspectives justement de soutien aux jeunes et qui repose en question notamment la question de la transition entre le monde de l'éducation et le monde professionnel. Et justement, une des pleines revendications qu'on peut avoir en France, c'est d'étendre justement le revenu minimum dans toutes ses composantes aux plus jeunes, y compris justement pour mieux lutter contre la pauvreté auxquelles font face les plus jeunes, y compris pour atteindre justement mieux efficacement les jeunes NEET qui justement malheureusement échappent et passent souvent entre les mailles des filets de sécurité sociale ou de la protection sociale. Et voilà, je m'arrêterai là parce que j'ai été encore beaucoup trop long. Merci.
Thank you, Romana, for these reminders. Actually, with our researchers, we have already discussed about a series of possible focuses. We will address soon also the territorial dimension, for example, which is relevant even when countries need to accept to implement the reference budget methodology. And it is needed to be addressed, is supposed to be addressed in many other dimensions. But we have 2 hours in limited time. I have to thank you, our speakers, for this session, for their effort to be short and sharp in their messages. But I would ask them to stay with us for the following session and interact via the chat and via the questions as the team is doing. David, I give you the floor again under the condition that we try to remain in the times. And then I will leave you in the safe hands of Marco for a little bit of exchange with our interlocutors afterwards, who can already forget any PowerPoint for later.
Okay, thank you, Marina. Thank you, everybody. I try to be eclectic and brief in the presentation of the second part, using some of the slides and the points we will try to outline, also to answer or to reinvigorate, let's say, the exchange and the debate with the audience. Some of the remarks I also found in the chat there.
Sorry to interrupt, but the quality of your microphone has suddenly deteriorated. At least that's how it's perceived here.
Okay, now it is still bad?
Yes, you're breaking. And might it be possible to have Andrea illustrating the next few slides while you're changing mic? If it's okay with both of you. Sorry.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now it's
now you're fine.
Now it's better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for the problem. As I said, I will be extremely rapid in the presentation together with Andrea. So if there is any problem with the audio, no problems. We shift to Andrea. Please, Andrea, move to the following slides. Here, in fact, it's Andrea who provide a very rapid wrap-up of the historical evolution of the European Union debate and also of the main decisions taken in the last years and decades on the topic of minimum income guarantee. So, Andrea, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, David. So yeah, but very briefly, in this slide, we offer a brief overview of the most important steps and achievements made at the EU level regarding minimum income guarantees. So basically, we try to put things in order and trace the policy attention that has been given to social exclusion and their fight against poverty within EU institutions and circles. So we all know that, of course, European integration has long since been centered on the coordination of economic, social, and labor market policies. And the concept of social exclusion began to emerge already during the 80s. And in fact, the fight against poverty and social exclusion is first mentioned in a 1989 resolution. Then further steps have been taken during the 90s, and particularly important to mention a 1992 Council recommendation, which advocates the adoption of minimum income schemes in all member states to be fostered through a systematic exchange of information and experience, and also a continuous evaluation of adopted national schemes. So this reminds us of the idea of mutual learning. It is important to mention this because actually this is what happened to some extent with the introduction of the open method of coordination during the 2000s. So in the late 90s, with the approval of the Treaty of Amsterdam, the particular protocol on social policy, which was annexed to the Maastricht Treaty, is integrated into the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. This is very important because actually the protocol proposes as one of the objectives the achievement of a sustainable level of employment and the fight against exclusion. In effect, this is extremely important because it expands the intervention of EU institutions in the social policy domain and providing new legal foundation for the future. And this legal foundation are actually Article 151 and Article 153 of the treaty. So to conclude, following the entry into force of the Treaty of Amsterdam, the need to implement measures to combat poverty and social exclusion is reaffirmed with the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU, which gains legal value with the Treaty of Lisbon. And then, as I mentioned, starting from the 2000, the open method of coordination starts functioning as a soft law instrument to promote mutual learning and good practices among member states in a number of social policy areas, including social exclusion. Then, following the outbreak of the 2008 financial crisis, anti-poverty policies return at the very center of the debate with the, let's say, a renewed sense of urgency. And actually, it is a resolution, a 2010 resolution of the European Parliament that emphasized that minimum income should be set at a level equivalent to at least to the 60% of the median income. And then there is another regulation, which adds an important piece to the puzzle in 2013 by stating that the European Social Funds has to be used to fight social exclusion and to support member states in achieving the priorities and targets set within the Europe 2020 strategy. We all know that one of the 5 headline targets of the strategy is to reduce by at least 20 million people the number of those at risk of poverty. And then since 2000, the European semester has been functioning as an important instrument with its thematic focus on minimum income that has fueled the debate on the importance of the fight against poverty. And then we arrive finally at the 2017 European Pillar of Social Rights, which we all know provides a specific principle, Principle 14, which is on minimum income provision. So this is very briefly the evolution of what has been done so far, which we believe is very important to take into consideration in order to debate what are the next steps to put forward.
Thank you, Andrea. If you move to the other slides, thank you. So on the base of this background, historical background, and what's happening nowadays in Brussels and at the European level, throughout the report, we first of all look at the political momentum that to some extent seem to open for a more decisive, let's say, step in tackling poverty and social exclusion at the European level. And in that respect, there has been a sort of overlapping, I would say, of the political debate on the one hand, and also of the analysis of the scientific debate on the other. For instance, some analysts refer to a sort of new political momentum, or if you want, a window of opportunity for changing a little bit the priorities on the agenda. And some have talked of the room for a new social compact that could be discussed at the European level, talking about minimum wages, talking about minimum income guarantees, talking about more progressive tax systems. In the end, basically a new agenda, a little bit more socially oriented agenda that, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic, could be at disposal of the policymakers. The second aspect that has been outlined by the more recent literature is about the let's say, sensitivity of the public opinion across Europe. And in that respect, especially a recent Eurobarometer survey related to what should be the key priorities in the next few years for the European Parliament clearly refer to EU-wide minimum income guarantee as one of the priorities that should be addressed. So this seems to be consistent with the sort of window of opportunity to progress on the fight against poverty and social exclusion at the European level. And in that respect, also the debate that we have to some extent summarized throughout the report between stakeholders, European institutions, the position and the conclusions of the Council, of course, the action plan Andrea already talked about for European Pillar of Social Rights, all seem to converge towards more ambition, let's say, in the anti-poverty strategy. And this has been also the case for the debate between the member states, at least up to the Ukrainian war, that probably to some extent change a little bit the context. Andrea, if you can move on. So the political debate has been marked. We have a more detailed reconstruction in the report in terms of the different presidency of the European Council, especially the German presidency that seemed to push for some advancement in this field. And of course, the role of the social stakeholders, the social partners, trade unions, European Trade Union Confederation has been extremely active in promoting a directive on this topic, but also EAPN, social platform, all converge to some extent in these. There are, of course, missing actors, and there are also a sort of differentiation between the different member states that probably lead then the Commission to downgrade a little bit the ambition of the strategy and to talk about a recommendation rather than a directive. And this, of course, it's quite disappointing for many of us. What we focused in particular throughout our report and our research project has then been an issue related on the one hand with the indicators, if Andrea can move to the following slides, and we already talked about that, but the other side has been precisely the legal base. And I saw that also in the chat, one of the questions coming from the audience was precisely about the legal base for the EU directive or recommendation. And in that respect, I refer here, and we have shared, let's say, the pleasure together with Andrea in reading the contributions by Arangis, Verschuren, and Van Lancker. I'm not a law expert, but really it's fascinating the kind of analysis that these three authors provide in many different pieces of work about the potential alternative or combined different legal basis for a directive / recommendation on the topic of poverty risk prevention and protection. And, I think this is also extremely relevant, not just from a legal point of view, but also in terms of what are the prospects and also what are the objectives and the lines of action that European decision makers want to pursue. And there are basically two references that seems to be the strongest ones for a new instruments to fight against poverty at the European level. One is the legal base provided by Article 153, and in particular on the social integration of those excluded from the labor market. In the work by Van Lancker et al., it's clear that this is quite a solid, especially for the personal point of view. What are the social groups, the categories that could be addressed through this legal base? But there is also another source, that is Article 175, of the treaty, that is the one about strengthening economic, social, and territorial cohesion. And here, I would say this is quite relevant, not just, again, from a legal point of view, because it is a good link, providing a quite encompassing legal base for an advancement, a progress in the EU legislation in the field. But it's also relevant because it make explicit the link between the fight against poverty on the one hand, social cohesion on the other, and the fight against inequalities. And it seems to be not just from an institutional or legal point of view, but also from a political point of view, a very key point. Also because if you open the door to fighting against poverty as part of a broad strategy to improve social cohesion, well, the following step is precisely what already Andrea outlined, that is the full activation of the multi-annual financial framework on one hand and the Next Generation EU on the other, to provide not just a legal support, but also financial aid, financial support to provide more effective strategies against poverty. And in that respect, you know, many of you, I also see Marcello Natili, who has worked on this interplay, knows also from some of the member states on the base of the multi-annual financial framework, the past one, and the financial programs for 2014-2021, that there is full of evidence of how the financial resources coming from structural and investment funds can really make the difference in approaching, especially I would say in the latecomers, so in the countries that are still trying to reinforce the institutions to fight against poverty, how and why and to what extent financial resources from the multi-annual financial framework can make the difference in pushing for more effective strategies against poverty. So we were really fascinated by this work by Van Lancker et al. And we really think that here there is a very good point, whatever the instrument that is decided in the end, even if there is a recommendation and not a directive, you know, a good legal base could represent an interesting point to you know, a more active and ambitious strategy at the European level. Then I'm going to the end of our second presentation. Still a key issue we have seen also in the first part of our meeting today, monitoring the social scoreboard, improving the capacity to shed light on the condition of the different groups of the population in terms of poverty risks and in terms of analyzing the effectiveness and the adequacy of the different instruments. There is room for a lot of improvements. There is a lot of debate, both in the SPC and in the academic circles. And Tim has already talked about the extended headcount ratio. I think this is another fascinating contribution in the literature that could be easily translated into practical points in the agenda, in the policy-making agenda for improving the social scoreboard. And I also think that the benchmarking framework the SPC is working on together with the Commission is really decisive in order to improve, first of all, the soft governance instruments, and on that base, you know, the possibility to be proactive also in more binding or stringent legal instruments at the supranational level. There is a lot of, let's say, room for improving the instruments that we have in our hands today. Then going really to the end on this basis, so we have talked about the different positions, we have talked about the debate on the legal base of the new instruments, we have talked about the problems in monitoring, then there is the proposal by the Commission for a new recommendation. And here I would say the key points that have been debated in the last weeks and months are, on the one hand, the actual exclusion of certain groups, particularly at risk of poverty or social exclusion, from the instruments and the legislation in the member states. When we talk about migrants, I think this is a crucial political issue in many European countries. Homeless people, it's another key target for improvements in the legislation in the member states, and where the European Union can improve the coordination of the member states' strategies. And then, of course, much has been debated about the famous 3 dimensions where improvements could be, in fact, achieved: adequacy, accessibility, and the enabling policies. And here I also take inspiration from the exchange that we had some weeks ago together with Joseph Voss about the combination of income sources also for the elderly. And we know that in many countries, at least part of the elderly count not just on pension benefits, but also on income from work, even after the retirement age. And that's a big issue. It's a big issue because, for instance, the impact of the pandemic and each kind of major recession clearly has a negative impact also on pensioners, because pensions are safe, but the other incomes coming from work, of course, are deteriorating because of the recession. And second of all, the same topic is relevant for inequalities, because for some pensioners, as always stressed by Joseph, it could be feasible to some extent to combine benefits coming from the pension system together with some income from work. But for many others, it is completely out of context. And so the issue there is, again, a matter of inequality and sources of inequality also for the elderly. Take-up ratio is another issue that Rute has outlined. This is absolutely crucial. There was no time today to talk about that, but this is a clear element related to the effectiveness and the efficacy of minimum income schemes and guarantees. And then, of course, the key political problem at the European level is how to make the European semester work more in social terms than in terms of economic coordination. And here again, the importance of the social scoreboard is quite crucial. So to sum up, if Andrea, okay, the recap as far as the EU debate, on the one hand, it's clear, we have seen also today, there is a focus on the need for better monitoring. And we know the SPC, the Commission, are working on there, but probably we need more on that respect. Second of all, that there was a window of opportunity. I'm not sure it's still there, but we know that stakeholders and especially trade unions are pushing for making this window still open to have a relevant advancement on the fight against poverty and social exclusion. And third of all, what seems to be a keyword for both strategies at the domestic level and at the European level is integration, policy integration, meaning basically a strategy, multidimensional strategy where, to fight poverty, you need effective minimum income guarantees, monetary transfers, but also a monitoring of costs. And especially in the context of high inflation, this is a major issue. And you have also the need to define an effective strategy to grant access to social and health care, because otherwise, even putting money in the pockets of the people, especially for elderly people, is not enough. I stop here. And of course, the integration at the supranational level means also it is important to focus on regulation, but it's also important to focus on redistribution through the European budget and through the Next Generation EU. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to leave you in the hands of Marco Cilento, Head of Institutional Policy at ETUC.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David and Andrea, for having put on the table all the policy options in a very detailed way. So we know what to do to what we could do to achieve a right to a minimum income. But to discuss with you and to react to your presentation, we have with us Iris Bach, he's head of unit of the European Commission on social policies, child guarantees, and other topics. So he's the right person to react and to provide us the European Commission point of view. And the second speaker will be Marcello Natili from the University of Milan, and I understand that Batterio Jessula will not be with us today. So it will be Marcello Lentini that will intervene. And from the trade union side will be Judith Zugler that will react. Considering time constraints, I will give you 7 minutes each. And the first one will be Iri Sbark. So, we have talked today of the relevance to have a minimum income scheme, but not only to talk about income, but also accessibility and affordability of fundamental services that could ensure dignity of people. So probably the intervention that we may have at European level, minimum income, should be coordinated also with this this other area, of protection of people. Probably this can be coordinated, but this is really up to you, Mr. Asbark, to tell what is your point of view and what the European Commission is doing in that regard.
Okay, thank you for the floor. Maybe I will start a bit by explaining what we actually mean by minimum income. I mean, when we look at the minimum income schemes or minimum income support or sometimes minimum income protection, we talk not only about the benefits, the cash support that is provided to people, but we talk at the same time and with the same emphasis on social inclusion and labor market activation. And these are the 3 pillars of minimum income schemes that we consider important, because this is very well reflected in the formulation of the pillar principle 14, these 3 strands. Because what is important is that the beneficiaries or the people who end up in minimum income schemes do not stay there. I mean, these schemes should not be designed to park people. The schemes should be designed in a way to help them to climb up the ladder and get as close as possible, maybe not in all the cases fully, but as close as possible to the labor market. So that is important, because often we talk about comparing the level of benefits, etc. But we need to look at the schemes in their holistic way. Now, just to use the time, I will speak maybe about 2 points. First, monitoring, and then policy making. On the monitoring, that's the easier one, so I will start with that. On the monitoring part, we have heard also from previous speakers that there is a benchmarking that is available that also reflects this 3-pillar approach. The SPC is jointly with the Commission working on a report on minimum income. We are also monitoring this in the context of the European semester. There have been country-specific recommendations, etc. So there is a lot being done. I mean, if you compare it to other policy areas, what we have been doing on the monitoring side of minimum income is quite a lot, but obviously I agree with the previous speakers that there is enough. There is never enough of monitoring, and this can always be improved. Some points on the indicators, as it was discussed. On the very first presentation, the poverty rates, just one word of caution. The hike in the 2020 figures is actually mostly attributable to the break in the series in Germany, which, by the way, was revised downwards just a few days ago in the Eurostat pages. So we need to be careful in interpreting the data here, because what it represents is we don't have a yet confirmation of the impact of the COVID crisis in the silk data. Without the German break, which includes spike upwards. Without that, the situation would be relatively stable in terms of income. But we will probably see in the next years. Maybe 2020 figures are still relatively early to reflect the effect of the pandemic. So we will probably see that in the next years. Some calls for harmonizing the data. I mean, we need to be realistic in a sense that the schemes and the designs are very different in member states, and though we will obviously continue to work and to get better and more granular information and data, we will never arrive sort of to an ideal situation in terms of harmonization and comparability, simply because the systems are very, very different. Also, thank you for the presentation of the thinking about the new indicators. I think the debate should not probably be whether one indicator should replace another, but more about how we can complement the different indicators and put them together and to show, the colorful picture of what is happening on the ground. For example, I mean, we had recently done a study on absolute poverty that also looks at the different ways of measuring poverty. Not easy. So what is important is actually to be aware of all the limitations of the data, and try to fill the gaps with what is available, and we can obviously, and everybody, and it's a task of the academic community to be creative in this sense. So monitoring. On the policy making side, I think what I would like to flag here, that again, I think we have moved a lot on the EU level, and in such issues as basic social protection floors, like it or not, we cannot expect an overnight breakthroughs in changing the systems and approaches and consensus, etc. Just looking back, I mean, we had countries that did not have a minimum income systems in place at all, like Greece and Cyprus, that recently joined the club now.
1 minute, please.
1 minute. Okay.
Yeah, it's running out of time. If you can conclude in 1 minute, we would have to.
Okay. So quite some developments in countries: Greece, Cyprus, Italy, Spain. What we also do in terms of policy making, so to help, is to provide funding, especially for the inclusion and labor market activation parts. We have minimum income scheme reforms in the recovery and resilience plans for some countries. We have a technical support instrument to provide for support to reforms. So there is a lot of going on behind the scenes. One important point I want to mention is the poverty targets that were set out in the action plan to implement the pillar, and they were welcomed by the leaders in Porto summit last year, which again put all these questions into the forefront. And now we are discussing and hopefully finalizing soon national targets with member states to contribute to the EU level ambition. So there's a lot of work there. What is important, and I think I would also come back a bit more to the legal base and the question what can we do, what we cannot do at the EU level. Well, let us please be aware that it all boils down to what kind of consensus we can get at the EU level with the member states. Just a private opinion, I think there would not be much sense into sort of forcing something upon, even if we had even if we had the competence, which we in principle do not have, to forcing some social protection solutions to member states. So we need to build up a consensus around these issues, and I think that this is what is happening over the years. It was nicely demonstrated in the Council conclusions that I think somebody already mentioned today, with some, quite nice approaches and formulations, and also invitation to us, the Commission, to present the update of the framework. So this consensus is absolutely necessary for be it recommendation, be it directive, or whatever instrument. Targets I've mentioned. Well, I will probably stop here and leave the floor for others. I hope it was useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Val. Sorry if I had to reduce the time of your intervention, but really we would like to stick more or less with the time we have on our agenda. So I pass the floor to Marcello Natili, because also to achieve these ambitious objectives we have, including the Porto target, we need to finance policies and to find the resources for that. Marcello probably will address this point. I will ask you also to refer to the European Social Fund, and if you can tell something how performing is this fund for the objectives we have on the table today concerning.
Yes, I will address also this point, and thank you very much in general to the ETUI and to the ETUC for organizing this event. I really think this is a crucial topic, both poverty and minimum income schemes in general, and it's a crucial time to speak about this topic. And I'm also happy because it allows a little bit to me to disseminate a little bit of results from a decade, more or less, of research on this topic, both on the national level and on the European level, done with Matteo Jesula, that unfortunately had to leave us because he has class and he has teaching duties starting from 4:30. I would like to start with one point, also responding to a question on whether there are comparative data showing how much difference the benefit level, but not only the benefit level, also the access, the coverage of minimum income schemes, and also the governance structure in terms of active inclusion. Well, there are some data, some comparative work on that topic done by myself, but also many others, including Tim, Sarah, that has been mentioned earlier. And what these actually studies outlines is that there is a huge differences across Europe in terms of generosity, coverage, and ability to actually offer a route out of poverty with minimum income schemes. And although here I'm generalizing, as a general rule, they show that poorer countries where poverty is higher tend to have a lower, less effective last resort safety net. So where the need is higher, we have, as a general rule, less effective minimum income schemes. And also, and why this is important, because research on decentralized countries clearly outlined that without a strong role of the center, we won't have this kind of upwards convergence that we all aim to. So we need a strong role of Europe in this domain. On this front, it has already been very clearly outlined what has been the role of the European Union in providing soft mechanism and coordination mechanism, and as by David and Andrea also. And it is true that we observe some kind of positive news on that front. It has been mentioned that Southern European countries made relevant step forward in the last 20 years. At the same time, we have also to admit that some countries retrenched significantly their benefit within this framework. I want to mention Hungary, for example. Some countries actually made some step back. For example, Romain mentioned the fact that there are some countries age requirements to access this benefit. In other countries, there are residence requirements. I think that on these issues, to guarantee access and to guarantee that no countries retrench this benefit, there is much room for improvement in terms of the role of the European Union. Third and final premises, based on my previous work, I mean, it's not only in poorer countries that the minimum income schemes have become crucial and we need a relevant improvement. Everywhere in Europe, in light of the flexibilization of the labor market and the increasing precarization of work, so this kind of structural transformation, but also COVID. You mentioned there has been discussion regarding what were the effects of COVID. In a work that I just published with Stefano Ronchi and Fedra Negri, using survey data, so completely different data. Our results shows that depending on where you live, so the country, poorer country, the effect was worse, and the other factor that clearly increased the poverty rates was the contract type. So the type of contract, actually precarious workers were much more worstly affected by the COVID, at least in 2020. So also and these also in a rich country. So I think that there is a lot of room of improvement of minimum income schemes all over Europe. And also for this reason, I would really welcome a much more relevant role of the European Union. To overcome these three features, I share the opinion that a binding EU framework, such a European directive, would be the preferred option. I think that there are, as Gilles Varg just mentioned, really political obstacles that clearly prevent this kind of option. And there are some, for the moment, hopefully just for the moment, more than legal problems, I would say. But if this option is not available, at the same time, we can improve making effective usage of the hybrid governance system and the mechanism implied by the existence of recommendation, EU target on poverty, the governance architecture of the European semester. We can make some relevant step forward, I think, and the European recommendation would be a step forward. I would precisely mention in this framework the relevance of funds and linking the European anti-poverty strategy with the provision of with the cohesion funds, structural funds, or even ad hoc funds introduced ad hoc for this reason. And here I will refer to a book, Fighting Poverty and Social Exclusion in the EU, A Chance in Europe 2020, by Matteo Jessuda and Ilaria Madama. And the result of this book clearly show that in countries, especially in poorer countries, such as Poland and Italy, that were the poorer country among the sample of countries that these studies address, the relevance of funds and the possibility of linking structural funds to the implementation of the active inclusion component of the anti-poverty strategy was crucial in order to have positive, better results in terms of combating poverty. I don't know if I have time for an additional point concerning the poverty target.
1 minute. 1 minute, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Poverty target, I'm really happy that, I mean, as has been mentioned, that not only the European Union, I think that this is a relevant step forward. The fact that there will be national, national translation of the European target to reduce poverty by 2030. I think that this should be clearly addressed by the hybrid governance mechanism that I was mentioning before in the European semester or in even the recovery resilience plans. Perhaps it is too late for that. on one point on that, it would be really important that this data and these that in this kind of process participate also are structure included social and civil actors, I would say, to control, to check the progress made, the monitoring that was mentioned earlier by David. And I would add also by researcher, independent researcher included in the process, that this could also contribute to have a better understanding of what is going on and whether or not we are improving in terms of governance of the anti-poverty strategy, but more in general in terms of ability to reduce poverty in member states. And I'm sorry if I took too much time. I had other points, but too many probably.
Yeah, I'm sure that you have many points. No, thank you for Eileen and the time you were allocated, but I know that there are many points, and also the discussion today covered a lot of points that are very relevant. I would like to add two that are in the question and answer section because they are very close to the trade union heart. So giving the floor to Judith, it's worth it to mention them. One is the fact that it's not only an issue of poverty, but also in fighting inequalities. Income inequalities is said in the question and answers session. I would say also wealth inequality that we have in our target as a union, especially in the European semester. The second point is access of third country nationals to minimum income schemes. That for us is crucial. It's a point that we have on our agenda for a long time and that we will continue advocating. So this brings us into the trade union point of view. So Judith, the floor is yours. Also for you, 7 minutes. I have to stop you after 7 minutes. So thank you for accepting this. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say thank for all of you for your presentations, because almost everything was mentioned in them. So therefore, I don't need to speak too much. First of all, I like to concentrate rather to that points that are important for the workers, for trade unions, concerning this minimum income aspect. And after it, I think, or together with it, I will use a little bit the Hungarian example, because I know this the best. So first of all, what it was important for me and was interesting for me preparing to this workshop, I realized that when I looked for articles on any kind of information on the internet, and I used the word minimum income, or in the same in Hungarian, I could find in the internet, also in English or in Hungarian, almost the same minimum wages. So my first impression was that minimum income is not that word and not that instrument or phenomenon in the world of labor or in the world of social aspects, but is well known for everybody, and not in the legislation, not in the professional fields, not in the policy. So it's used this notion, but not as a very relevant, very special instrument, which is not the same as minimum wage. So therefore, what is important for us as workers to make clear what we are speaking about, what is the notion, what is the definition of this minimum income, what are we speaking about. So it would be important, especially for workers who are not lawyers and cannot interpret every time the whole legislation, the whole legal aspects and systems and the whole political system and so on. So first of all, we need clear regulations or clear policies, clear definitions, and so on. So I think you can understand, and I understand that it's rather difficult. And just this workshop verified that this is a very, very difficult situation to make clear these definitions what we are speaking about. As you also mentioned, sometimes wages, the poverty of workers, the poverty of pensions, who has has other incomes, perhaps wages and pensions and other kind of social security benefits and so on. So who have already incomes. Then I also studied the questions. I also realized that many of the writers, the authors understood under this minimum income notion those situations where somebody had not any income, not wages, not any kind of income. Sometimes so that who has income, but rather poor and rather low level. And of course, it was different. What is this level? It also was not an equal imaginations of the authors. What does it mean? And so on. And the measure of this income or the measure of this minimum income. So also very different aspects. So therefore, what was the second point for me, that the content of this minimum, this instrument, what does it mean to have minimum income, is also very important. What are the conditions? What are the terms of them? So I read, of course, EU documents, but it's also not the same. So sometimes I realized, I thought so that I can understand, but after it, another document, I realized that I don't understand well, because it was a little bit different things written in another document, so, and so on and so on. So I know that we are now in a debate, but I think we have to listen to it, and we have to be clear concerning the content of this minimum income also very well. Of course, it's difficult, of course, I know. And when we go to the legislation, the EU legislation, it was mentioned by David, but also the European treaty is not clear, not absolutely clear in this situation, because at the first article in 153 was mentioned the labor market, exclusion from the labor market, and the income at the labor market is the wage, are the wages. So therefore, it seems so that the treaty is speaking about wages. But when we go to the other paragraph, the social and economic cohesion, it was mentioned the minimum income, and it's now we don't know whether minimum income and minimum wages, what are the difference between the minimum income is a wider notion than the minimum wage. Minimum income also contains the minimum wages, or absolutely different. So I think it's no problem. It can be we can decide on anyhow, but we have to decide on thing because and this is the third point that I like to mention, the aim. What is the aim of this kind of minimum income regulation or policy or actions or anything? But what are the main aims, targets? It was mentioned the poverty, many times the poverty reduction. And after it was mentioned the labor market situations, labor market deteriorations, the gender aspects and so on, and perhaps as rights, perhaps as a human rights to have some kind of minimum to everybody coming from the human aspect, that they are human. Everybody who is a man or woman has the right to have some possibility to live at also. Therefore, I think that it is can be a lot of aim of this kind of minimum income aspects. So, and therefore, if we want to use a very effective instrument in our hands, I think we have to choose our real targets, because maybe we can tackle more targets at the same times, but I'm not sure that we really can tackle every kind of poverty at the same time as perhaps the other kind of social aspects. So therefore, I think it's important. Maybe I am influenced by the Hungarian version of this minimum income problems, and it is good or not good, I don't know, but I like to tell to you what does it mean. In Hungary, our government has a philosophy about this, about the social aspect. It means that everything is.
We have to. Thank you.
This so-called this society based on jobs, and who has jobs, they have everything. in a very simplified version. So the most important, the jobs. And what is, I can live with this, but what is very important for us and workers, and we are not satisfied with this aspect of the jobs, to have jobs, that we cannot accept that people who work 8 hours a day and so on, and get wages, they are poor. So I think this is what the most important for us as workers, that to have work, to have job and to work cannot in parallel with poverty. So these, I think these aspects are not in line with each other. So therefore, it's important for us. And of course, I could tell something, a lot of more things, but I think I have to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judith. I know that I'm sure there are some more comments, more remarks, but I think the debate was plenty of information, plenty of suggestions and good points that we will take home. So this is very important. So I just have to finish the debate here and pass the floor to Nicola and Lina for the final words.
Thank you very much, Marco. I don't have any final words. I don't think we will have the final words. I think it's quite clear from this document that I was reading a few days ago, the draft proposals of the Conference on the Future of Europe, that there's a lot more to come in this domain. 2 proposals in particular, the ones contained in Proposal 14 and 15, speak about setting up, and this is of course all aspirational at the moment, a common framework for minimum incomes to ensure that nobody is left behind. And Proposal 15 on demographic transitions speaks expressively about preventing old age poverty by introducing minimum pensions. So I'm sure there's much more to come in the coming weeks and months, and I'm sure we will all be counting on Lina Carr and the colleagues from ETUC to keep us up to date with these developments. But I would like to thank all the speakers and pass over to Lina for some conclusions.
Thank you very much. I hope the camera decides to turn. I think we had very interesting presentations. It will finally turn. We had questions and some answers.
Yeah, technological,
very
highly digital,
very high tech. We had questions and also answers to the questions online. We have lots of links for various studies, research, which is absolutely great because as ETUC, we are not stopping here. We are actually continuing because we have an approved project which will hopefully start from the 1st of June. And one of the key topics, key issues that we are looking in this project are precisely the pensions and the minimum possibility for minimum pension. Clearly, the minimum income will not disappear either because we are expecting a communication or recommendation from the European Commission this year in the second half of the year. So as ETUC, we will be also responding to that proposal when it comes. And also from my side, on behalf of ETUC, I would like to thank all the speakers. Don't be surprised if we get in touch with you again, asking to lend your brain to us, to give us good ideas and help us to move forward to make better, stronger policy in the current very uncertain times that we are living through. Thank you for the interpreters making it possible for us to hear and listen in a number of languages. And hopefully we will meet again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.